Nandalala tere pyare nam lahe. Gopala tere pyare nam lahe. Nandalala tere pyare nam lahe. Vajra Radhe Govinda. Gopala tere pyare nam.
Namaste. I'd like to welcome you to my heart and to the Kriya Yoga teachings. Today I'd like to talk to you about Brahmacharya in the land of milk and honey. Now, Brahmacharya really means two things. It means celibacy and asceticism. Of course, celibacy, I think we all understand. And asceticism means a simple life, leading a simple life. And that has to do with a simple life mentally, physically, and verbally. And it also means a proper lifestyle. Some people go to an extreme, and so things are done, which for a different time to talk about. But I'm just talking about generally celibacy and asceticism, and that's the Brahmacharya. The land of milk and honey is very interesting. In the Bible, the land of milk and honey, the promised land, is mentioned in Exodus 4 times, Leviticus once. It's mentioned in Numbers 4 times, Deuteronomy 6 times, Joshua once, Jeremiah twice, and Ezekiel twice. That's 20 times. The land of milk and honey is referenced in the Bible. If they're talking about it that often, there must be something important there. And of course, I'm suggesting that there's something important to understand, to know, both mystically and physically. And I always like to go along with that old saying, as above, so below. So whatever's happening in the physical world, it's happening in the subtle, or if you want to call it the astral world, but I'm going to call it the other higher realms, astral, causal, divine realm, whatever. They're all reflections of each other. So if something is happening internally, it's also happening externally. And this land of milk and honey, what I'm suggesting is that there's a physical piece of land, which is the land of milk and honey, but it would simply be your vacation resort. That's, you get away from the world and you enjoy life. That's your land of milk and honey. So there is a physical piece of property. Now people like to start get possessive about it and protective and saying, oh no, it's a very specific, I don't know. To me, that's extremism. The land of milk and honey is a physical piece of land, but it's your home. Because you really enjoy your home. And within the land of milk and honey, there's milk and there's honey. What does that mean? You say, oh, that's just a nice poetic way of saying something very sweet and nourishing. Nourishing because milk, it comes from, a cow or sheep or an animal, and it allows us to live, to survive. Honey is very sweet, and so it has to do with the sweet things in life and the sweetness of honey. And in the land of milk and honey, if you want to move from the physical world, which I'm saying the physically there, you go into a more subtle physical world, which is the internal mechanisms of the physical body. And if you were able to kind of step out, up and back, away from your physical body and turn around and look back down into the physical body, what you would see is actually kind of interesting. There is a spinal column, which we all know about, but within that spinal column is a spinal cord. And on top of the spinal cord, or connected to the spinal cord at the top, is the physical brain. And so you have the spinal column, the vertebrae, On top of that, you have the skull, the cranium. And then inside of that, you have a brain and soft matter and the spinal cord. And what's interesting about it is there's a fluid in there. It's called cerebral spinal fluid. And it's inside of the spinal column, and it holds the spinal cord in place along the spinal column and the cranium. So the fluid is all throughout the whole system. Now, if you look at it in the physical world medically, that fluid it's pretty much a clear fluid. However, what I like to say is if you look at through the sunlight of God, through that divine sunlight, if you look through it, it has mystically a kind of a milky white color to it, coloration to it. Along the spinal column, in various locations, you have glands. And in particular, at the top, you have the pituitary gland and the pineal gland. And these glands secrete a substance, a fluid. And if you look at this fluid, again, from a mystical standpoint, it has kind of a golden honey color to it. So obviously, you understand now where I'm leading to, or that can secrete from these glands. The fluid slowly moves and rotates around the cerebral spinal system. And for the most of our life, we're pretty much unaware of it. However, if you are involved in mystical practices, what you'll notice is that there are times in meditative states, or actually it doesn't even have to be a meditative state, but if you have a proper lifestyle, if you have a proper attitude towards life, you can actually feel things happening in the spinal column. It could be related to temperature or a feeling, kind of a bubbly feeling. It's an interesting feeling, that sensation that you get. And that's this river of life that they would talk about mystically. So there's a lot of different references that are used. And that's the river of life, the Ganga, the Mississippi River, if you come from American Indian culture. The river of life, and that's what it is. It's also the land of milk and honey. Now, the secretions from the gland, particularly the pineal gland, as I mentioned, it has a golden honey color, but not only that, it has an effect on you physically and on your conscious awareness. The effect that it has is euphoric. The glands can actually secrete a DMT-like compound, the drug DMT. So your body actually physically produces this DMT-like compound, and it produces these feelings or mental states of consciousness that are, for lack of a better word, I'll say are very nice. They're very pleasant, and they're very super conscious. Let me put it that way. It produces nice feelings, nice states of awareness. And as I said, these fluids are rotating, the CSF is rotating, the pineal gland and all the glands are secreting fluids. And these fluids are having effect on the body and what they do to the body. And as they affect the body also affects them. So what you do with your physical body affects the way these fluids flow and what happens within these fluids. It's a circle. What happens in the physical world is happening in the astral, it's happening in the causal. It's just reflected down. And so if you start doing various things physically in this world, it has an effect on this system. We all know about adrenaline. Adrenaline comes into our system, and we're able to do a lot of activity and get into situations where we can do things that almost appear to be superhuman. And I don't want to get sidetracked on that. All I'm saying is that there's this effect that what we do physically affects how these fluids circulate within us and how they affect us. And guess where that leads to? And what we would also include in that includes sexual activity. Now, what sexual activity does is it takes the fluid and tends to, because wherever we take our consciousness, wherever we move our consciousness, that's where the energy goes. And so if we move our consciousness down to what I'm going to call the base of the spine, and we involve ourselves in that type of sexual activity, those fluids tend to be drawn down, and that's okay, but we want them to circulate. And so if you deal with sexual, everything's fine and wonderful until the point of release. And at that point, then all the energy moves, and it is moved out into the physical world. And the problem with that is that it pulls away from the top of the spine, where we also have creativity of God consciousness and these other higher states of awareness. And so it draws it down away from that. And what it does is it makes it more difficult for us to attain these higher states of consciousness. Whereas if we do meditation and meditative practices and spiritual practices, we always take our awareness and our consciousness and we move it up towards the top of the spinal column. And the reason that that's done is because it takes that energy and tends to move it up the spinal column. And again, it leads to these higher states of consciousness, higher states of awareness. So when we have a lot of activity, now I'm focusing on sexual activity, but it's any kind of activity into the physical world, it pulls the energy down towards the physical manifestation. And so I hopefully am communicating to you that you have two types of creativity that you can be involved with. One has to do with higher levels of what we would call higher levels of consciousness in the mental, spiritual realm. And we also have creativity in the physical world, the lower realms, at the base of the spinal column. And the inclination is to say, oh, you're talking about it's a bad thing. And that's not what I'm saying. There's a purpose for everything in life. And it's important to understand that Yogananda, and Kriyananda has talked about it, Yogananda, Shelley, Sri Yukteswar has written about it, and they say very specifically and very importantly that the physical body is required to attain enlightenment. A physical body is required, it's required for enlightenment. The physical body is required for attaining these higher states of consciousness. And so Sri Yukteswari taught very clearly the human body is the most precious instrument for God realization, for awakening the kundalini within us, along the sasamanic channel, to open the heart and to still the mind, to produce right karma in the physical world so that the grace of God can descend upon us. And so I hope I'm communicating effectively something that's really important. Householdership is an important and necessary part of life. Without householdership, without a family, without building a family, making a family, building a family, we are unable to attain to these higher states of a consciousness. So, as they would say, there's a place for everything and everything has its place. And that really is the message that I have for today. Hopefully I've communicated the key concept of what I mean when I say Brahmacharya in the land of milk and honey. I could add one other thing to that is a lot of people might think, well, Brahmacharya means you start at the beginning when you're first born and you go through your whole life. I was brought up in a Catholic family, and so that's the idea that I had. It was a kind of a lifestyle that you attain throughout your life. But that's not necessarily true, which, if you understand what I'm saying, is at any point you can say to yourself, okay, I've decided to move from the physical world and focus on the physical world. I mentioned it before, having to do with celibacy and asceticism, and I want to be a little more ascetic, not to an extreme, but to be a little bit more ascetic. And the reason I choose that pathway is so that I can start working on these higher states of consciousness and developing and working with the physical body and doing things with the physical body that will enhance the opportunity and create better conditions for these higher states of consciousness and spiritual states of consciousness. And so I would close with those ideas, those thoughts. I kind of struggled through a little bit of it, and hopefully through all of that, I was able to at least communicate the idea and the concept of, what is Brahmacharya all about? What is asceticism all about? Why do it? Does it have any meaning? And my answer, of course, obviously, is that it has enormous meaning, tremendous meaning, and it's tremendously important. Also, making babies has tremendous meaning and is extremely, extremely important in the whole process of life, evolution, and evolution of our spiritual life. Namaste.
Nandalala Tere Pyare